Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, and our next guest in the studio is Thom Laub, VP of Sales of ThreadTech. Welcome, Thom.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you on Radio Entrepreneurs. Tell our listeners a little bit about your company and what it is you guys do.
ThreadTech is a startup manufacturer. We do product development and production for designers, fashion designers, and apparel companies.
So you guys provide infrastructure as a manufacturer, obviously, and you work with a broad cross-section of clients, people that are in startup mode, perhaps putting their first samples together, all the way up through companies that have clients and need production capacity?
Correct.
So tell us about the challenges or reconciling those two worlds. Is a lot of times, I would imagine, educating your clients of how the business works if they're a first-time foray into fashion, all the way up through somebody saying, I've got to have product in the stores to meet my shipment needs. So tell us how working with those two worlds varies for you.
It varies enormously. A lot of our clients are young. Or new. They're not necessarily the same thing. A lot of times it's somebody who's decided to chase their dreams after having a career in another area, and they decide they want to become a designer, and they don't know anything about production. Students coming out of school, graduated from fashion schools, we actually find that there's a lot of holes in their education.
Not surprising.
And that they have not, there's a lot of things they need to know about real world production that they're not taught in school.
So how do you guys, as a contract manufacturer, and this is something that is intriguing, because I would imagine, knowing the little that I know about the apparel industry and manufacturing, is you're often working with patterns and fixed consistency, at least in terms of what you're making. And one of the things that you always hear about production is, when you have to change patterns, or you have to change designs, or you have to change how things are done, it slows the whole mix down and makes it very challenging. Now, I would imagine you're doing shorter runs, smaller runs of things, rather than large scale production, or is that completely wrong? You guys have the capacity to turn out 10,000 garments.
Correct. Mm-hmm. We can do at any capacity. We have the ability to ramp up or ramp down according to what the needs are. The process for getting clothing ready for production is called product development, and that's the part where we go from sketch all the way to finished sample. I often compare it to architecture and building a house. There's no way anybody would build a house without having a finished blueprint. And clothing is exactly the same way. We're just making something different. So we have to go from sketch to pattern. Then we have to go take it from pattern to first initial sample to make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle fit together properly. Then we call in the designer or apparel company to approve that and do a fitting. And the fitting often needs tweaks. Once we've made those tweaks, we go back and make the tweaks to the sample and then adjust the pattern again so that it reflects those changes. At some point, we get a final approval for a final sample, and that is when we are ready to begin all the other preparations to go into production.
And it's interesting because you're dealing in an industry, and again, this is my naivete, but I assume there's not a lot of standard, even for something as simple as sizing. One manufacturer's medium is another manufacturer's large. How do you reconcile those pieces?
Sizing is a nightmare.
Because there really is no global or industry standard to it.
Correct, and much to everybody's frustration. And each designer or apparel company often decides what they want their sizing to be. So in order to size something, and the process of turning it into the different sizes is called grading. In order to grade a piece of clothing, we have to know how they want their sizes to go. So we determine that in the product development process, and then we grade it. And grading is a unique aspect to ThreadTech. Typically, the old traditional way of doing clothing manufacturing, you actually have to use some outside vendors. Grading is one of those. Tech packs is one of those that used to use outside vendors. ThreadTech is different in that we do those two things in-house. So somebody comes to us and we can take them from sketch all the way to finished product without using any outside vendors. And so the whole thing is smoother and faster, less frustrating. Often time translates into money, so it can also be less expensive.
So interesting that you guys are a Boston-based company. Obviously, that's where you and founding team emanated from. Boston traditionally is not known as a hotbed of apparel manufacturing. You know, we've got historical roots, if you will, in footwear.
Correct.
A lot of footwear
Yes.
manufacturing and development in the Boston area. How do you guys come about with the apparel? And is there a market? I mean, obviously there is, but where's your client base located? I guess is the question.
That's a really good question. Yes, manufacturing has a very old history in New England. Textiles, it's where it began with the Industrial Revolution, right? We're in the heart of that. Today, though, Boston seems like an odd place to open an apparel company, a manufacturer. That does make us different. And so there's a few things. Danielle wanted to open the company here because she lives here and it's easier to, right? That's one thing. The other is that we are always, it's a tech-driven area, and ThreadTech, as the name implies, uses technology to be streamlined and is going to continue to add different types of technology, some of which is proprietary, in order to keep it streamlined and to do it differently.
So I would imagine one of the challenges as a young company, as an entrepreneurial firm, is because you have the scale and capacity or capability to scale production, there's a significant investment that's been made in infrastructure. And or you have great partners to back you up.
Correct. We're always open to new partners if anybody is interested. But yes, the machinery is involved. Some of it's very expensive, and a lot of it, like the cutting tables, are really large. So that's another reason why we are where we are in East Boston. The space is conducive to that. Also, the building has additional space, so as we grow, we won't have to move. We just have to kind of add on.
Expand
into
move one of the functions to another area.
Exactly.
So you talk about apparel, and apparel comes in various shapes and sizes. You know, I would imagine, and again, not knowing specifically, but a woman's fabric line, you know, blouses made out of, you know, either a man-made fabric or a less synthetic of some sort is very different than a coat manufacturer, for example, in terms of the. So where do you guys focus? Do you focus in any particular niche as far as apparel is concerned, or do you run the gamut? Is, you know, just knowing that the machinery, the equipment, all of it must be very different depending on what niche you service.
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is both. We can manufacture almost anything that's clothing related, but we do focus on the items that are what we call contemporary women's. Usually within the industry, people know what that means, and that's kind of like middle quality to luxury. And there's a couple reasons. One is our staff is super skilled, and clothing, though we use sewing machines and machines, it's still a human process. And so it really actually requires skill. And the higher the quality of the construction, the more the person is involved with the actual construction and the more skill it takes. So we kind of excel at really nice quality clothing to luxury quality. And so we tend to go there. The other reason that we focus on that area is there's some places where as we're trying to return manufacturing back to the United States, there's places where we just can't compete still with Asia. T-shirts, baseball caps, anything where they make a gazillion of them, right? We don't do denim. Denim is largely done in American made, is done out of Los Angeles, and even though it's kind of not great, even though they often say it's American made and market it that way, they're still using a lot of what we would consider
Foreign components or
sweatshops.
Sweatshops.
Yeah, and ThreadTech is founded on the distinct move away from that. If you come visit, you'll see it's bright and airy. It's a nice environment. We really focus on offering livable wages and a nice working environment.
How common is it, and I guess it makes perfect sense for companies that are in startup mode, new designers, et cetera, that don't have production capacity, but is it more and more common today for any apparel manufacturer to outsource manufacturing? I would imagine, given the infrastructure costs and the uncertainty in the marketplace, and the expertise necessary, given what you're talking about, really a lot of the people that were sewers had a skill set that doesn't, it's not taught today.
Correct.
Very often, I would imagine, a number of people that got into this industry, it's passed down from generation to generation.
Very correct.
And
yes.
so, are you seeing, is that where you guys see an opportunity? Is that, the cost to get a manufacturing environment off the ground is just cost prohibitive today for people?
We're in the lucky position of having an extraordinary production manager. She's super skilled and she's able to train people. So we actually have the capacity at ThreadTech to train people to the skill level that we need them. So we look for talented young people coming out of school a lot of times who already know how to sew, and then we up their skill level.
So there are programs that are teaching people how to sew today?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of designers don't choose it, or I don't know. I would say that
it's not the sexy part of
not,
design.
It's not, but you know what? Without it,
Right.
The whole industry doesn't exist. Somebody has to make it.
Good luck
right?
putting the panels together,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Glue didn't quite pan out to what they thought it would.
Yeah. And to go back to one of your earlier questions, the apparel companies, and that includes the shoe companies, they all have lines of apparel. You know them as shoes, right? But you go into any one of their stores and they have a ton of apparel, right? And most of the really big apparel companies, some portion, right now I believe it's somewhere around 10% of the apparel that they produce. They've already for quite some time been producing it in the United States. The demand now is growing to do more of it. So that puts ThreadTech in a really nice place.
And to follow up on that line of thinking, I would also I know that most brands that have extensive line extensions, category extensions. So you're really high end or noted backpack manufacturer, and suddenly you want to make, blazers, go along with them. They don't get into production. They license it out and, to a manufacturer or I would imagine somebody who has distribution, but maybe not manufacturing capabilities, whereas a place where you guys can come in, the ability to manufacture, and they don't have to invest in manufacturing blazers.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting niche, and fascinating. To you guys are sort of between what might be considered two hotbeds of apparel manufacturing. I would argue Montreal, it's got a huge history, and New York. So sitting in Boston, right between the two of them, potentially expanding and offering companies in Canada the opportunity to produce in the U.S. might be an interesting opportunity for you guys as well.
The founder and I were just recently, last week, in New York. We're actually starting to look for locations. The plan is to expand into New York in the next year and a half to 2 years, as well as other fashion-heavy locations in the country. But New York is next, and we already have clients there. We go down pretty regularly to meet with people.
So one last question before we wrap, and it's been fascinating to find out. If a company that is manufacturing, you used a very broad stroke in terms of what your capacity is, but where's sort of that sweet spot? If a company is producing X quantities, What does that look like to you that makes a lot of sense for you and what you guys like to see? Can you narrow it down to
quantity?
In terms of quantity, can you narrow it down? Is it 2,000 and up? Is it 2,000 to 10,000 as a sweet spot?
I think right now it's 2,000 and below. One of the things that we really offer is what's now called small batch production. Small batch allows us to evaluate each project on its own merits. So it's not necessarily about a specific type of clothing, can we do it or not. It's more about, let's see the whole project, let's see what's involved with it, let's see how many you want to order, what quality level, what's your retail point that this needs to, that you want to sell it at, so we know what we have to produce it at. And if all of those things come together in a way that makes sense, ThreadTech will take the project.
Excellent. Our guest on Radio Entrepreneurs has been Thom Laub, VP of Sales at ThreadTech Inc. Tom, if people want to get in touch with you, find out more about working with you guys, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
My email address is sales@threadtechboston.com, and our phone number is 857-222-1847.
And that's ThreadTech, TECH.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Just to make sure people get it.
Yes, threadtechboston.com.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure having you on Radio Entrepreneurs, and we love to follow our entrepreneurial stories. Maybe a year down the road, we'll have you back on and talk a little bit more about that expansion, and wish you guys the best of luck.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
And we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.